Welcome to the DIY Wealth Canada podcast, a show by independent investors for independent investors. Join hosts Bob and Nelson as they discuss investing, personal finance, and much more, all from a fiercely self-reliant Canadian perspective. As a reminder, nothing you're about to hear is investment advice. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the DIY Wealth Canada podcast. I'm Bob alongside with Nelson here. We got a very exciting episode today. We're going to talk about how to build wealth. So Nelson, this is a pretty big topic. Where do you want to get started?
Boy, that is a great question because, as you said, it is a massive topic, and we could probably spend hours chatting about just kind of certain things that we do in terms of frugality, in terms of trying to make more money, etc. Ultimately, it comes from, wealth for regular people anyway, comes from savings. And savings come from one of two things. You either make more money or you spend less money. For me, I've always thought that just limiting yourself to one or the other is just silly. And what I always focused on doing was a little bit of both. I tried to relentlessly cut any expenses that weren't giving me joy in life. When it came to food, like I like restaurant food just like anyone else likes restaurant food. But what I discovered was that there were certain restaurant foods that I could make at home that were every bit as good as what I would get at a restaurant. One example is steak. I refuse to go to the Keg or anything like that and spend $50, $100 on a steak because I think I can cook an equivalent steak at home for a fraction of the price, especially if I get that steak on sale. So for me, frugality was sort of this low-hanging fruit. I could very easily cut out certain things, but at the same time, I wanted to increase my income over time as well, because obviously that's important and that scales forever. The issue with that, of course, is that, you can walk in, you can ask your boss for a raise, but they don't have to give it to you. It's a lot harder than frugality. So for me, I always focused on both, but I always found frugality was kind of the easiest way to increase savings. Would you agree with that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think when you get started going down this wealth building journey or financial independence, retirement journey, the easiest thing to really dive in is cutting your expenses, right? So that's where frugality comes in, because you could easily cut back. I think, right? Like, nowadays lots of subscription services. Maybe you don't need 10. Maybe you cut back. Right? You probably don't need like Netflix, Disney Plus, and HBO Plus, right? Maybe you could go with one, and that could really easily save you some money in the long run, right? I've got into the regular occurrence of calling up the my cellular provider, right, and then trying to negotiate better rate, even internet providers, right? So if you save $10-15 here and there per month, over a year, that adds up, right? But at the same time, you can only take frugality to a certain extent, right? I think extreme frugality isn't healthy, and that's probably where I started it, right? I was trying to cut back on a lot of things, food, try to eat as cheap as possible. I certainly was there when I was a bachelor, right? Traveling in Germany, working in Germany. So I was extremely frugal, but it doesn't last, right? You can only do it so much, and then you start depriving yourself, right? And take your restaurant example, Nelson, right? Like nowadays we still eat out, but like yourself, we don't eat out just for the sake of eating out. We go for food that maybe we don't make as often or easy. We can't really make easily at home, right? Like sushi, for example, we don't really make that at home, so we tend to go out for Japanese food. Whereas steak, I could cook a steak just as well as any restaurant. I think, as long as you could buy quality meat, right? Or even pasta. Yeah, I can make pasta myself. I don't need to go to a restaurant to order pasta, right? So things like that. I think it's about balancing and finding the right balance for you. Right now, do you budget at all, or do you have a system, Nelson?
I am very strident anti-budget. I think budgets are terrible. And to be clear, like, I don't mean that people should spend all their money. I don't think that, I'm not advocating just a willy-nilly sort of approach. What I'm advocating is that savings come first and then you spend the remainder. The whole pay yourself first, wealthy barber, David Chilton, shout out, because he was the one who essentially came up with that. What was that, 40 years ago now, in The Wealthy Barber?
Mhm.
That's the way to do it, as far as I'm concerned. It is, the emphasis is on saving, the emphasis is on getting ahead, and then you spend from there. And I understand that there are all sorts of elements to it where, if you don't have a high paying job, then you can't do that. And you can't just say, I'm going to spend 50% of my income, or I'm going to save 50% of my income, if the numbers don't work. If you're spending 60% of your income on, rent and a car payment and food, then obviously you can't save, 50%. The numbers don't work. But the mentality of, I'm saving first and then I'm spending later, or I'm spending the remainder, that is the thing that was probably the number one factor in me getting ahead and getting to the position where I am today. How about you? Now that I've sort of crapped all over budgets, are you a budgeting guy, or do you do the
I
same thing that
guess
I do?
we do have a budget, but not in the sense of your traditional budgeting where I don't even know. Like we start off, it's kind of like the envelope system where we allocate a certain amount of money per category, right? So I don't remember who started this, but we have like a few different categories, right? Necessities, which is like all the necessary expenses, right? Play account, which is like nice to have, like eating out, massage, etc. What else do we have? Give account, which is for gifting, like charitable donations, gifts for Christmas and birthdays, etc. The long-term savings for spending, so that's like saving money for vacation, big expenses that we anticipate coming up. And then last would be financial freedom account. That's where kind of like pay yourself, right? So all that money in the financial freedom account would be money we invest in either TFSA, RSP, or non-registered accounts, or even RESP. Actually, RESP comes from the long-term savings for spending, I guess. And then we allocate certain percentage per each category, and some months we go over, but what we strive for is on like end of the 12 months period, we're under the numbers, right? Under the allocation, and we tweak the number each year. We have developed the system of reviewing our spending sort of every 6 months, and then see if we need to adjust a little bit here and there. That system works for us. We have been doing it since sometime in 2010, and I have a massive spreadsheet. And what I find good is that we could get a trend. I think budgeting is great, but I think the most important thing is understand the trend, right? Are you spending
Mhm.
all of a sudden a lot on food, or is like, are you trending up because certain things, like we got two kids, right? So once they start eating solid food, we saw our budget on food going up, right? Which makes sense. But when you could analyze the trends, it's like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Where, maybe you didn't realize that you're spending a lot more at restaurants, right? So that's where you could adjust your trends. So you could say we're budgeting, but not exactly in the traditional sense, if that makes sense.
It's almost like you're tracking more than you're budgeting. It's kind of what it sounds like to me,
Yeah,
where
I
it's
think
like you've
so.
got
Yeah.
everything, every dollar has a plan. And that's kind of the important part, is that you take everything, you're divvying it up, and then you make sure that every dollar is being used well. And then you're tracking everything. And the importance of tracking everything is that, if you don't know where every dollar is going, then how are you supposed to improve? How are you supposed to sort of optimize your budget if you don't even know where every dollar's going?
Exactly. And that's where I think it's important, right? And then just going back to the frugality side of things, sure, you could buy things on sale and spend a lot of time. And when we started, we certainly did that to a certain extent. But nowadays, like we focus on healthy food, right? So we grow produce in our backyard, but we buy as much as we can in terms of organic, right? So our food budget is probably more, and quite honestly, it's like our time, right? Like I could spend, you know, hours going to different grocery stores, or me and my wife, and try to price match everything and buy things on sale. But is it really worth it, right? Now, if you're just starting out, maybe not worth it for you, but for us at this stage of our financial journey, that's not worth it for us anymore. But we, Nelson, you used to work in the grocery sector. So do you have any tricks in terms of groceries?
I have a ton of tricks because part of my job was working so I started working in the store, and then I moved to head office, and where one of my roles was coming up with flyer deals and learning everything about the flyer process. And I won't get into too many details on that, but I will say that I did learn a lot. And basically what I learned is there's grocery code for items that are on sale that are sort of loss leaders. And those are the items that I spend 95% of my grocery looking time on. Because for me, if I can get a loss leader, especially on something like meat, then I can freeze it and I can have cheap steak or cheap pork chops or cheap chicken breasts for a very long time. So what I do when I look at flyers, so every week I use the Flip app, which is wonderful. That pulls up or pulls together every flyer from all the grocery stores. You save them into your favorites, and then every week I go and I look. And what I'm focused on is usually the front page of the flyer, because that's where they put the best deals. And there's some sort of language on there that says great deal, wow, or there's a limit. The limit is the store telling you that you can't buy too much of this stuff or else we're going to lose too much money. You should love limits. And so then what I will do at that point is when I see a great deal, I will go again and again and again and buy as much of it as I possibly can, not to the point where I'm wasting, but to the point where I have a nice little stockpile, and then it goes in the freezer, and then I have it for months at a time afterwards. And what I found is that I can save anywhere from 30 to 60% of my meat costs by doing that. And then the rest of my grocery budget is relatively small because in terms of your side dishes, vegetables, when you buy them in season, things like that, they cost comparably less than meat. So that's my sort of process there. And in terms of, just frugality in general, what I described there in general, for me, it's a game. I spend an hour a week on this stuff. A lot of weeks I don't even bother doing anything because the deals aren't good enough. So I spend about an hour a week on this, and it's a game. The game is how much money I can save, or how I prefer to look at it is what's my return on investment. If I can save 50% on some meat that I'm buying anyway, that's a fantastic return on my investment. And it doesn't take for me that much time. Now, the difference is, between me and you, Bob, is that I have more time than you. And therefore, it's less of a time suck for me to get this whole process going, when a guy like you might say, hey, I work, I've got this podcast, I got this blog, I got all these things going on. It's maybe not worth it as much for me to go down that path versus Nelson going down that path.
Yeah, that's true. But having said that, we I mean, it sounds like you and I both have a freezer probably sitting in the garage, right? So we definitely do what you do in terms of meat, buying bulk, going to Costco or finding deals and then buying bulk, right? And then freeze them, like separate them into smaller portions and freeze them, right? So that's certainly something we do regularly, and that has saved tons of money over time. And then there's certain items that we purchase regularly, right? Like we drink oat milk, and we've been drinking the barista oat. And whenever those go on sale, I usually get a ton, right? So like 8 or 10, or even I sometimes go back to stores multiple times within a week because there's a limit on how many you could get, right? And there's certain items that are we eat regularly. So whenever those go on sale, we buy them and kind of store them if we can, right? So that makes a lot of sense. That's pivoted a little bit because we talk about like groceries and things, and we were talking about how to save in terms of frugality. But what about income? Like, what are some ways to increase your income? Because I think like you said, both frugality and increasing income go hand in hand, right? It's about increasing that savings gap.
Yeah, like I said earlier, you can't just, I mean, you can to a certain degree go to your boss and say, "Hey, I'd like more money." And that works sometimes, and then sometimes it doesn't. For me, that's just not a replicatable formula that you can use. Now, I'm not saying to ignore your career completely, obviously not. What I'm saying is that increasing your income is going to be a process. It's going to take some time, it's going to take some energy, and you can't just flick a switch like you can frugality. So, saying that, that doesn't mean you should give up on that. For me, the biggest thing during my journey was the use of side hustles. I had a job. The job was 40 hours a week. There was a little bit of overtime thrown in there sometimes that I was always happy to do because overtime was a lot more money than regularly. And I would do that, but mostly I would try to embrace side hustles on my days off and try to find just little jobs that I could do that would pay relatively well, that there wasn't a time crunch on them. This was before the days of really making money on the internet. I really didn't start doing that until kind of the 2010s. So in the 2000s, in terms of side hustles, one of the ones I did was I would deliver washing machines and dryers and stoves and fridges for a local furniture company. They would pay me, I think it was $20 a delivery, and it would take an hour or so, which in the 2000s was a nice little income. And I could do it around my regular job because it was okay, we'll deliver it this day. As long as I had an hour of availability that day, I could do that. And yes, it was only $20, maybe, 3 or 4 times a week, but one or two of those can really add up over the course of a year. So for me, when I was young, the side hustle was incredibly important in terms of giving myself sort of an immediate income boost. And then from there, you could focus on more long term things at work that would get you an income boost in terms of promotion, a raise, etc. So I think that for me, that side hustle was incredibly important. And I had numerous different ones kind of over the years. What about you? What would you say has been important for you on that increase in your income front?
Yeah, I think side hustle is important, and with the prominent internet, there are a lot of side hustle opportunities, right? Like you could if you have a specialty, you could set yourself up in Fiverr, for example, to provide services or other things. Yeah, side hustle, I think it's definitely something someone should look into, especially if they have any skills that they could offer to other people. And that's a really quick way to scale up your income, right? The other way for me, one thing is, like you said, Nelson, negotiate with your employer, right? I've been told your employer will always try to give you as little compensation as they can. and your job is to negotiate as much as you can, and both of you would meet somewhere in the middle, right? It's a negotiation game. Obviously, companies are always trying to have as low OpEx as possible, right? And that's where you need to advocate for your own sake, right? So there are many different ways to increase your salary. Like, for example, one traditional way is jump around companies, right? So if you go from one company to another, you may see a bit of bump in salary. That's easier to be done if you're in a hot sector, or if your skills is highly sought after. Another way which I have done is, really build up my reputation within the company, right? So highlight some of the key things I have done, some of the key contribution I have done, and then do my own research, either through Glassdoor or Indeed or other, even PayScale, where you could kind of see your position and what the average salary is. Right? You could see a range, and you go to your employers. Like, well, I've done A, B, C, D. I made the company this amount of money, and improve efficiency or whatever. Have some quantitative data to back you up, and then bring up the salary scale. It's like, well, my positions here looks like the average in Canada, or in my area, or in whichever city is at X, but I'm at Y. So at least bump me up, and you get into the little bit of a negotiating position, right? And you need to realize that if you've been with the company for a while, even if you're only there for been there for a couple of years, it takes them longer to find somebody to replace you and train somebody, right? So it's disadvantage for employers to lose an employee over 10-15% of salary typically, right? So if you're reasonable and you have been contributing, you typically could get a little bit of salary boost. Now, it doesn't work all the time. You kind of have to ask for salary increase strategically. Obviously, if your company's not doing well and not making much profit, then that's not a great time to ask, right? So there are ways to do things, and I'm sure we could talk more about it in other episodes if necessary.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point in terms of you have to take care of yourself, and you have to sort of take control of your career. And you talk to any boss out there, managers, maybe not anyone, but I know in my career that I would talk to managers and they would always say things to you like, nobody values people that jump around, like a employer values a long-term contributor, et cetera, et cetera. And let me tell you, my experience is that they're saying that because that's what they value, the manager values. And, Bob, your point was really good where you said, like you have to look at it from what do you bring to the equation? And the answer is a lot of people really discount themselves and what they bring to the equation. They don't factor in that it takes time to train a new person, that they do have things that they do well. All they look at is maybe the negatives, or maybe they might not compare themselves very well to their friend who's in the similar position or whatever. And companies thrive on that stuff, and they will absolutely do their best to make sure that you feel just insecure enough that you won't ask for more money. So I think that's a very, very important point. And I'll say that if I had my career to do over again, if I was 20 years younger again and I was just starting out in the workforce, that one, I'd be much more aggressive when it comes to asking for raises. And two, I would be much more likely to jump ship for a better opportunity and for more money. And when I did, I would be firm on kind of negotiating that salary in terms of leaving. I'd be, how it is in an interview. You can't just say, hey, I'm leaving for more money, but you can certainly say code words that kind of nudge the conversation in that direction. So I think that it's absolutely a great point that it's not easy to make more money, that way, but it's something that you have to do and you have to take control of, or else you will be left behind. And ultimately, like I said earlier, with regular people like us, savings is wealth. And if you make more money, then you have more savings.
Yeah, and I think the one tip I've learned, and I certainly made this mistake when I first got out of university, was when an employer offers you a position and gives you a salary, don't be afraid to go back and say, hey, like give me another, 5%, 10%, right? I didn't do that because I was naive. I just took the number they offer and was I super happy. But looking back, I could have probably got another 10% out of the offer, and over time that would increase quite a bit, right? So that's something, if you're jumping around or if you're just starting out, definitely focus more. Like there's lots of stuff you could look up how to negotiate your starting salary, and that will go a long way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think for every subsequent job that gets easier too, where when you're first starting out, it's easy to have a hiring manager who's maybe in his 50s or whatever, or her 50s, say, hey, this is what the way, the position pays. And if you don't like it, we got 14 other guys out there. It's easy when you're young to fall for that. When you're a little bit older and you say, no, like I'm specialized in this field. I know that there aren't that many candidates like me out there. And then you can be a lot more firm when you're older. And like you said, it's a game. You're going back and forth. And if they like you enough to offer you a job, then chances are they're willing to wiggle a little bit and work with you, as long as you're not, like a dick about it. You go into it and you have some sympathy and, so on. There are ways to negotiate and there are ways to not negotiate. As long as you're respectful about it, you'll be fine.
Absolutely. So that's pivot again. So we talk about the income and the expense side. Now, once you have a bit of a savings rate, we also talk about how to increase your savings rate. Next step on building wealth is really about investing. Would you say that's the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, obviously investing is important. We're going to spend a lot of time in this podcast talking about investing, and I don't want to downplay it, but at the same time, it's your savings rate is really the big driver, especially when you're young, because the more you can save, the more you can invest. But saying that, obviously investing is important. Obviously, the returns you get are important, but I think that in terms of returns, there's not a lot you can control. Like ultimately you invest in the stock market, you invest in real estate, like whatever you invest in, it's out of your control. You put the money into the S&P 500 or whatever, and then the stocks go up or they go down. And there's not really a whole lot you can do to control that. So I would focus on the things you really can control. And one of the things you can control is keeping your fees low. And that doesn't mean to avoid using a professional altogether. What it means is finding the least expensive way to get to your goals. How would you factor in that in terms of saving fees? Is that something that you've spent a lot of time on over the years, or is it maybe something that's less important?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, right? And I think a lot of people kind of stress themselves out with the market and what's going to happen in the future. Like those things are outside of your control. So why worry about them, right? Really focus on things that you can control, right? So we talk about your savings rate. That's something you could definitely control, right? Regardless how much money you make or how much expenses you have, like you could control those things. And then when it comes to investing, yeah, fees are important, right? So we could talk about high NER mutual funds, which I made mistakes years ago, where I was investing in high NER mutual funds, and that really eats into the return, right? Or trading commissions, right? We're probably dating ourselves, but years ago, it wasn't free when you buy and sell a stock, right? Used to be, in the 50s or even more, and then over time have come down. I think most Canadian banks, their trading platform charge around $10 or around there, right? And then for a while, Questrade was charging $4.95. That was the cheapest in Canada. And then recently, Wealthsimple came into the market and offer commission-free trading, which changed the landscape, right? When we started investing, we wanted to really reduce the trading fee. So when we invest, we always try to do sort of account the trading fee, where we want the trading fee to be less than 1% of the overall transaction fee, even lower the better, right? So that means if your trading fee is $10, you want to only trade when you have about $1,000 or more. So your overall trading fee is less than 1%, right? So keeping that as low as possible really goes a long way, because you can imagine if you're trading in and out and that commission just eats up your return. What about you, Nelson?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on commissions and keeping those expenses low. Now, obviously, like you said, you've got Wealthsimple. I'm a Wealthsimple client. I believe you are too. And that obviously helps in terms of keeping your costs down. I'd say the other thing is that if you still are paying commissions from one of the large banks or one of the other alternate brokerages that does charge fees, the longer you hold an investment for, the lower that fee becomes over time. So say, your example of it's $1,000 transaction, you're paying $10, that's a fee of 1%. Okay, great. But if you hold that stock for 10 years, all of a sudden that 1% transaction fee becomes 0.1% per year over 10 years, which obviously helps keep those costs down. So for me, that's always how I looked at it, where when I was paying commissions, it was as long as I hold this for a long time, my trading cost goes down, and it really, almost rounds down to nothing over the long term if I keep it long enough, versus something like an ETF, which those fees are also quite low, nothing compared to the mutual funds that a lot of our listeners invested in back in the day. You're charged 0.1% instead of 1%. I mean, so it's only a fraction of the cost, but they still charge you that every year on an ETF. And if you hold that for a very long time and it keeps going up, those fees will add up over time, even though it's a lot better than what it used to be. So for me, that's always how I looked at it. If I could hold a stock for a long time, then I would benefit from only paying that fee once.
Yeah, and I think you talk about holding something for a long time. That's also an important thing, right? Let your money compound over time. I think especially with free trading nowadays, it's easy to go in and out of stocks whenever there's a market scare, right? Like recently with the tariffs and things like that. But I think the key really is not about time the market, it's about time in the market. And I have written about this numerous times on my blog. It's not about trying to time it, at the market low or sell it at the market high, because you don't know, right? Like if you could time it perfectly, there would be lots of billionaires, right? But nobody can. So it's better to just leave your money in the market and then invest regularly and let the compounding work on its own, and just try to leave your emotion out of investing. I think that's a very important lesson that I have learned over the years.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic lesson for everyone. And what you didn't mention, which is also important, is that you defer taxes by not selling. If you have a winner and you sell that winner, not only have you interrupted the compounding process, but you've also created yourself a taxable event, assuming that that's in that account, of course. Which reminds me, I wanted to ask you, how do you use RSPs, TFSAs as part of your kind of overall wealth building strategy? Was that something that you used aggressively or more selectively? Can you maybe go through that just on a high level and kind of tell us what your strategies were there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think for Canadians like you and me, TFSAs and RSPs are excellent tools to use for building your wealth, right? So TFSAs, I don't like name because it's tax-free savings account, but I always look at it as a tax-free retirement account. And RSP is great where you could defer your taxes essentially, right? Get a tax break the year you're contributing. We've been maxing out both our TFSAs and RSPs every year since we started, right? So between my wife and I, we max out both TFSA and RSPs, and then once we max them both, we then invest the money in non-register. So we're trying to use the tax advantage accounts as much as we can. And really, like TFSA, once you put in whatever growth you get out of there is tax free. So that is extremely, extremely powerful. You do wonder if the Canadian government will stop TFSA one day because they're probably losing a lot of tax income due to TFSA. But as long as TFSA is there, definitely take advantage of it. And RSP is great. It's the amount you could contribute to RSP is 18% of your working income from the previous year. So as long as you're making income, you get RSP contribution room. And the nice thing with RSP is whatever amount you put in, say $2,000 or $5,000, you get to deduct that amount at your marginal tax rate, right? So you get a credit. So you could potentially, if you're at the cusp of the next bracket, you could bring your income, your tax rate down to the lower bracket, which could be very powerful. And the idea is when you're working, you're at a higher bracket. And then when you retire, when you withdraw money from your RSP, the idea is you're earning less money, so your tax bracket is lower. So that gives you tax advantage with an RSP. What about you, Nelson? Are you taking advantage of RSP and TFSA?
Well, at this point, no, I'm no longer investing in my RSP. TFSA is no brainer. It's the first account that I put my $7,000 in on about January the 3rd every year, because if there's not going to be any tax on those gains, then absolutely I want to prioritize that account. In terms of RSPs, no, I'm not contributing to my RSPs right now because my earned income is quite low. I do have the newsletter. I make a little bit of money off that, but it's not enough to make it worthwhile for me to invest in my RSPs. When I was working, I was very aggressive every year, maxed it out because of the immediate tax savings that I got. I was motivated to keep my tax bill low, and at the same time I was saving for my future. I thought that was a win-win, but I think I would do it a little bit differently in hindsight. I think I would save more of my contribution room for higher earning years. When I was 18, 19 years old and I was only making $10 an hour, I was contributing to my RSP, and in hindsight I should have kind of banked those years of contributions and waited until I was making more money and then contributed then, and kind of got the better tax savings there. And then instead of investing in my RSP, of course I would still invest in the money, but I would have put it in a taxable account because the taxes on the dividends would have been much, much lower. So, but that was just a minor mistake. And now it's, it's not that big of a deal. The important part is to save, and the details, as long as you get them mostly right, then it's not a big deal to have made a little mistake like I made there.
Yeah, I think the important part of growing real wealth over time is really, we talk about, like earn income, right? How to reduce your expenses, and then such that you're growing your savings gap. And then the next step is really about investing. Now, you may not, you're going to make small mistakes here and there. We all do. There's no perfect investors out there. Even look at Warren Buffett. He has made tons of mistakes. But I think the key when it comes to investing is like reduce your big mistakes, right? You can make small mistakes, and as long as you learn from these mistakes, that's the key thing, right? And really limit your big losses, because those are going to come and bite you in the rear end, right? Reduce the amount of loss you have, and over time, let the compounding do its job and build wealth that way. It's really simple when you look at it at a high level, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. At the end of the day, building wealth is just doing simple things over and over and over and over again when you would rather be doing you'd rather be doing easier things. You'd rather be spending your money on whatever. That's what you need to do to build wealth. And it's not easy, but it is easy. And what I mean by that is that you just got to do those unpopular things over and over and over again, or else you won't be in the position where you'll have any significant wealth at all. So, Bob, I think we're almost out of time here. Was there anything maybe that you wanted to add, or that we missed, or anything like that?
I think one thing that I forgot to mention is really stick with your long-term investing strategy. Like develop a core investing strategy. So for you and I, it's dividend investing, right? And then over time for us, we branch out into index ETF investing, so hybrid investing. But if you're a real estate investor, like stick to this core strategy, and then once you have a sizable investment, that's when you could start branch out into different strategies. I think having a core strategy is important, and don't jump around between different strategies, right? And always chasing that shiny penny or shiny dollar. Like I know a lot of people went into when cannabis was just about to go legal in Canada. Lots of people chased that, and then some made money, some didn't. Some people chased with the cryptocurrencies, and there's always the next hot thing, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But have a core investing strategy, right? And then once you have that, if you want to chase that shiny little thing, you can, but like limit the amount of money, right? So for us, for example, even though we do hybrid investing, we have about 5% of our investment portfolio that we do, sort of higher risk stuff, right? So for us, we see is we're limiting our risk by only allocating less than 5% of our investing portfolio. If we lose all that money, yeah, it's going to hurt, but it's only 5%. If it goes great, that's excellent, right? So that's something I forgot to mention earlier.
That is a fantastic point. And I think that we should dedicate an entire episode to investment plans at some point in the future, because you're right. So many people, they don't have a plan. They just bounce to whatever sounds interesting. It might be Bitcoin. It might be whatever the sexy new stock is. It might be real estate. It might be whatever. And there's no plan. They're just bouncing around to whatever's the sexy new shiny object. And I think it's a real disservice to people to not have a plan. For me, everything came from my plan. My plan was I wanted dividend income to cover my expenses. And from there, every investment that I make comes from that. It is, does this get me closer to my plan? Yes. Okay, good. Then I'll consider it. Does this get me closer to my plan? No. Okay, it's out. And I think that's extremely important for people to do. So I'd like to do an episode on that in the future. But for now, let's kind of wrap it up. Bob, thanks for chatting with me. It's always a good time. And we'll see everyone next week.
Yeah, sounds good. Have a great one, everybody.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe to never miss another episode. For more from Bob, visit his site at tawcan.com. That's TAWCAN, all one word. Nelson can be found at CanadianDividendInvesting.com. They're both on Twitter as well. Just search for Tawcan or CDI Newsletter. Thanks. See you next time.